Hello.
Hello, hello, hi.
Thank you for joining us here
Pleasure.
at Borders Book Festival and with Blue Media. So you obviously use a lot of comedy and in the sense of like political satire. So I wanted to ask you why you think comedy and politics so often sort of collide, and do you think comedy has a role to play in politics?
Somebody did once say that the trouble with political jokes is they get elected. And maybe that's true with Trump, we don't know, but I think the trouble with Trump is that, and I worry about this myself when I do him because he's a very entertaining character to do, but I sometimes worry if by making fun of him, I in some ways make him funny, and actually in many ways he is profoundly not funny because he's dangerous. And Boris is the same. I get it as a character who is very colourful and lends himself to comedy, but I think as I found out in the session with Anthony Selden, really what you need in a prime minister, and the most successful prime ministers have a kind of profound moral seriousness about them because they care very deeply about the country, they think about it, they take time to learn and to respect their office, which he didn't do. For satire, for me, it's really about making sense of stuff, and then I make nonsense of it. So I try to understand how I come to it, and I sort of think, okay, what's going on? Try to understand that, and then try to take the comedy from that and make comedy of that. And the shortest route possible, because there's a funny line on something and there's a true line on something, and if the two come together. So to give you an example, when I was doing David Cameron, I was Prime Minister from about 2010 with the coalition, and people said to me, they said, are you going to make the rich richer? Are you going to make the poor poorer? And I think we've managed to do both. So I think that's important. And what that does is it brings together something which is, well, the voice is, it's fun, but the joke is funny, but also it's true. And when you do that joke for an audience, it releases something because they go, do you know what, that's funny, but it's true. And I think that's what you try to do. So I try to make sense of it, and having made sense of it, then say what I want to say, but in a way that is hopefully funny.
And who's your favourite person to impersonate?
Probably Trump right now, but I came to Scotland, as you know, I'm Scottish, as you know, you may not know, my mother, Trump's mother, Donald Trump's mother, who gave me my name, Donald J. Trump. You know what the J stands for? Genius, right? And so I'm Scottish on my mother's side, and I'm racist on my father's side, and this is it. So, but I started the Borders Book Festival, I started Blue Media, I start everything, and I'm a genius total. So he's good fun, but often the newer voices, they come through. I'm just working on Starmer at the moment and trying to get there, but he's got that voice a little bit like Josh Widdicombe. It's from the back of the throat. And I want people to look at me and say, yes, that is our least worst option. So he's a new one, and Rishi Sunak, who sounds a bit like he sounds a bit like a sort of camp Tony Blair, so that's what it is. And you ask how I see the future, my future for the next 5 years, and I say 3 words: California Beach House. So, you're coming up with new ones, but behind all of those, there's a little bit of truth and a little bit of what do I think about this, and what sense can I make of it, and can I make people laugh, and if it's not too kind of grand, can I make people think at the same time?
Yeah, and you've spoken a lot about having ADHD and sort of navigating that in your career. What would your advice be to anybody else who's sort of battling that?
Don't beat yourself up about it, first of all. It is a thing, very much a thing, and it affects 1 in 20, but I mean neurodiversity itself, there's the whole, what used to be called on the spectrum, but is now neurodiversity, so people with ADHD, dyslexia, Asperger's, Tourette's, autism itself, that I think ADHD itself, obviously attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and I take issue with 2 of those because it's not attention deficit. If you have attention deficit, if you have ADHD, you're paying attention, it's not that you're not paying attention, it's you're paying attention to too many things, you're distracted easily by so much that's what's going on. So it's attention surfeit, if anything. And it's not a disorder we're beginning to understand, although it is a neurodevelopmental condition, which means you're not processing dopamine properly, so you can sort of present as being hyperactive or restless or disruptive in a class or a situation where you're expected to be sitting down. Although you're sort of expected to be, I think it's a neurodevelopmental condition, but not a disorder. I prefer that last D to stand for a difference. And as we're understanding more about mental health, I think we're understanding that actually we're talking about brains that are different. And the tragedy is now, it affects 1 in 20, supposedly, so that's 500,000, 600,000 school-age pupils. And school-age pupils there's a crisis at the moment, a big crisis. 40% of school-age children in this country meet the diagnostic criteria for anxiety disorder. There's tremendous anxiety amongst our young people now. 7 out of 10 of the children who are getting excluded from school are neurodiverse. They have issues like ADHD, dyslexia or whatever, and yet they will go on in many cases to do brilliant things in life. 40% of millionaires are dyslexic, and a third of business owners or entrepreneurs, it turns out, have ADHD or dyslexia or both. And it was Francis Ford Coppola who said that the things that they send you out of school for are the things they give you lifetime achievement awards for later in life. So my thing is now that I want schools and GPs and people to understand that it is a difference. These are minds that are thinking differently. And more companies now are recruiting people who are neurodiverse because we see things precisely because we see things differently. Dyslexics can spot patterns incredibly. ADHD people make connections all the time. And I actually did a talk the other day, extraordinary, believe it or not. They invited me into MI6, which is our top secret service organisation. It's MI5 for inside the country, MI6 our foreign secret service, to talk about ADHD and in a room full of maybe 40, 50 you could say spies or secret service agents, and the awareness that many of those people that I've been talking to were not only there despite having a condition like ADHD, but because they had it, it made them who they are. So I would say, we know the symptoms of it. If it's a restlessness. It's like being in an open plan office where your phone is buzzing, your computer's buzzing, the person next to you is on the phone, an ambulance is going past, there's TV screens, all these calls on your attention. Not to mention this, all these. We live in an ADHD world. All these things are happening, and so all of us put up with that, and to a greater or lesser degree. It's when it becomes overwhelming and it means that it's very difficult to hold down a job or a relationship. That's when you might want to think, well, maybe I do have ADHD because I feel overwhelmed. This is something that I'm constantly struggling with, and that's when you might need to seek some help with it. But most importantly, don't beat yourself up. It makes you who you are, and along with ADHD, along with the restlessness, along with the sheer irrepressibility and impetuosity which can get you into trouble, along with all of those things, you also have an ability to really hyper-focus on something that gets your attention. So you are going to be a star in some area, and what we've got to do is to try and make sure that it's in an area which is going to make the very best of you. Because if it's not, people sort of jump the rails and they end up in a bad crowd, or end up dropping out of school or whatever. And we've got to try and do is to catch those people young enough to say, listen, you are not the problem. The problem in some ways is that society, in particular school and education, doesn't properly understand how to deal with the genius that they've got in front of them. And if they can just understand that you're different, that's not a license, by the way, to say, hey, I've got ADHD, deal with it. It's to say, well, to seek help and to seek advice and to find a way through it and to find a job or a vocation where it's an advantage rather than a disadvantage. And don't listen to the pushback saying, oh, all this overdiagnosis. It's not, it's just diagnosis. Oh, all these people are on Ritalin, all these people are on drugs and stuff. Well, nobody goes around and says, oh, all these people wearing glasses. Isn't it ridiculous? Oh, look at all these people wearing glasses. Well, it's because they've found a way to help them see more clearly. So I think, you will know, really, by and large. I think if you, day in, day out, you get into various scrapes, you take on too much, you're disorganised, you're disruptive, you've done something impetuous, again, you're aware maybe that this is starting to dominate your life, and that's when you might want to think about how to address it and how to deal with it. And medication is only one of those ways, but don't beat yourself up about it. And if you're a parent, I think the best advice I ever had, I said, well, how did you cope with your daughter who was had ADHD, went through university, had a child. How did you cope? And this man said to me, he said, it's silly, but he said, we just loved her. So for parents, unconditional love somehow, and for younger people coming through it, don't give yourself a hard time. It makes you who you are, and you will do great things.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a crisis, or there's a lot of wait lists to actually get these diagnosis, especially in the Scottish Borders. It's a really big problem. How did having a diagnosis help you?
It's like getting your driving licence. I think you seek a diagnosis already because you're aware. You already know. And so if you get the diagnosis, it doesn't, in a sense, tell you something you don't already know. It just confirms it. And I think what it does is, though, from that moment on, instead of the car driving you, you're driving the car. Because you think, oh, right, okay, I get it. I know what this thing is. And while it's not an excuse, while it doesn't give me a license to go out there and just beat people over the head with it, it's just, all right, okay, now I know what I can do. I can do something about this. And also the people around me can maybe understand a little bit more that's where I'm coming from. And if I'm a little bit irrepressible, if I do text them 20 times a day instead of 3 or 4 times a day, maybe they might just have to learn to just ignore some of my calls or some of my texts. So that's, but the meds thing is that there's a crisis about meds in terms of availability, and there's a deep crisis in terms of diagnosis, and people waiting 5 years, 6 years for a diagnosis. I think there's a crisis. And with a new government, we've got an opportunity, but it needs to be a conversation about across education and health and justice. I went to the Old Bailey, Central Criminal Court in London the other day, and I was watching a 21-year-old being sentenced, and I thought, gosh, you must be in a gang situation in London where there must be a lot of young people in that who've struggled at school and have got in and have become messengers and couriers in the drug lines and the gangs in London. And just to prove this point, 75%, 3/4 of the defendants, 3/4 of the people who are appearing in front of the Central Criminal Court in London now are under 25. 3/4 of them under 25. So we have a real crisis amongst our young people where a diagnosis is too slow and understanding is still not good enough, because these very people who are falling through the cracks are tomorrow's inventors and tomorrow's Elon Musks. I mean, Elon Musk himself, these are people who have incredible ability to be creative and to think differently and to invent and to transform. I mean, we talk about Da Vinci or Mozart or Einstein, unconventional minds who in a conventional education setting are being taught they're like a fish being taught to ride a bicycle. And a fish is never going to ride a bicycle, but it can become a brilliant swimmer.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Not at all. I love this festival. Thank you for being here. I mean, it really means it makes, this is great for us, because it's not just about, hey, how young children, look at young people, look at this festival. For us, it's actually, hey, this is the next generation, and you can learn as much from them as they can learn from you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Not at all. It's a pleasure. Thank you.